Welcome to a new Rational Politics. Today we're going to talk about a problem that exists really only in America, gun violence. I am joined at the table today by three amazing guests, and I'm going to quickly introduce them. First, Rex Laceby.
Hello, I'm Rex Laceby, Marine Corps veteran, patriot, proud Democrat, father, dog dad.
Ike McCorkle.
Hi, I'm Ike McCorkle, retired Marine, father of four, running for the U.S. House in November against Ken Buck.
And Karen McCormick.
Hi, I'm Karen McCormick. I'm state representative for House District 11 at the Colorado State House. I'm a mom, a veterinarian, and I'm running again this fall.
One of the things that Colorado is actually incredibly good at is getting on top of problems and trying to solve them quickly. Gun violence is one of the things that Colorado is literally at the forefront of states in trying to make sensible laws to help cut down on gun violence. Will it ever get rid of them all? No. Unfortunately, gun violence is going to exist while guns run rampant in the general public. Karen, you have been very closely involved in this particular issue. Let's first of all talk about what do we do about gun sales?
Well, our state has actually addressed some issues around guns and gun violence over the past 9 years, which have been pretty unprecedented as far as states go in such a short period of time. We were able in 2013 to pass a high capacity ammunition ban, which was very contentious at the time, and actually several of our state legislators were under a recall after that session because people were so angry about not being able to buy high capacity ammunition. We also had modernized the background check in 2013, which gave background checks for all gun buyers, regardless of how they acquire their guns, to be done at the state level, which is, I think, happened at the federal level more recently. So little by little, we are working to address how guns are purchased and the ability of ammunition, how much ammunition can be in one, set off in one shooting. And there's more to do, and there's more we've done in the last 2 years as well.
Right. Do you guys have any comments to make about that?
I do. As a proud gun owner and Coloradan, and former Marine and small arms instructor, also an avid supporter of our Second Amendment rights. I think that the focus of legislation should be keyed in on an end-state objective of reducing gun violence, and then how do we accomplish that, given the plethora of firearms that are out there, and access to things like, for instance, high-capacity magazines. I don't support a ban on high-capacity magazines. I don't support bans in general because I believe that they are constitutional infringements. What I do support is smart legislation that can have a downstream or in-state effect of reducing access and reducing gun violence. For instance, I believe that we need to pursue things like the item that is in my platform, which is a Safe Storage Act, that could have the vastest reduction in firearms injury, adolescent firearms injury, whether kids are accidentally shooting themselves because they have access to firearms at home, or God forbid they pick those weapons up and carry them to their schools. Storage is one of the single most problematic things that we face with respect to firearms in the entire country.
I want to comment
Colorado
on that.
is...
Yeah, we just passed this law, safe storage law, last year. In fact, we passed 6, I think, very reasonable measures last year, which is pretty unprecedented to do in one session. we passed House Bill 1106, if anybody wants to look it up on your Colorado General Assembly page. This is a requirement for safe storage of guns, and there are exceptions in there for if you live alone and there's no danger of a underage person in your house, but in certain circumstances, having that firearm locked and not loaded and in a way that only you can get to it, but to be able to get to it in a hurry, of course, if you need to. So I think it was a really well-written piece of legislation. This is one of those steps that will help save lives. Many times we are drawn to these mass shooting events that really affect our psyche and our national conversation and our statewide conversation. But more people die from suicide and accidental shootings than all the mass shootings together. So we're losing people. This is about saving lives, whether it's one life at a time, because every life counts, or 10 or 30 of these tragic events. And so really happy that we as a state moved forward on that safe storage piece of legislation. So I completely agree with that.
I love the safe storage legislation. We need to do more. It's not just a gun. It's going to make ammo harder to get. I've had several discussions with my Congressman Joe Neguse, who's very concerned about this as well, and I've suggested to him and other folks put background checks on getting ammo. Put wait times on getting ammo. I've got ammo. I'm never going to give it to some person, and spend some more time. We're not worrying about trying to get Boulder, Superior, Louisville just passed guns that say possession of an assault rifle is illegal, and that still doesn't get rid of the weapons. The King Super shooting we had, all the gun laws that Boulder County could have passed in the world didn't prevent that. We need to look at, as the representative mentioned, it's the mental health. We need to fund that.
Yep.
And we also need to better protect our children in the schools, and then fund the police and give them a chance to be able to react quicker.
Yeah, and because of the King Super shooting in Boulder, was one of the impetus for many of these 6 gun laws that were passed last year. We seized the moment at the General Assembly, knowing that that was the time to act, and another piece of legislation that we passed that would have found that shooter is an enhancement to the background checks. Mm-hmm. There were signals in his background that would have flagged that person, that he could have been found before he was able to have access to that that firearm that he had. So that was 1299. No, that was 1298. Just to draw more parameters into our background check system that is pretty good here in Colorado, but there were cracks, and finding individuals like that person at the King Super shooting is how we now know that was a crack, and how do we fill it. And even years ago, we did have, I know we were discussing earlier about mental health, people that might be going through the mental health system and have flags that aren't being shared. There are things that we do more in our state than are happening in other states, where we are finding those people that may not have the mental wherewithal to actually be in possession of a gun, and are of danger to themselves and others, just like our red flag law that we passed too. And I'm really curious to know, as a person involved in law enforcement, because many in law enforcement now are seeing the value of that law that we passed, the Extreme Risk Protection Order law that we passed a year ago, knowing that it is another tool in the toolbox for law enforcement to be able to do something when they see a potential issue with a person that has a firearm in the house and they're of danger to themselves, somebody near them, or others. So I'm curious to know what you might think about the fact that we passed that here in Colorado last year.
Well, that's one of them things that it's a great idea, and there's many great things about it, but how it's executed, and then who is the person that's signing off on that. What happens if someone doesn't like me? Someone with a, I'm a combat vet, been on 8 deployments, I'm also a weapons instructor. I've got a lot of great guns, which I would never say because I don't want, Big Brother to know and come after them, because then I would be an outlaw. But what if someone says that Rex is a bad guy? He's got some PTSD. I got some from some gunfights, some of the places, my elected officials. You sent me to go down there, and we come back with some baggage. But I've been considered a good person. I help teach women with a program called Women on Target, sponsored by the NRA. I'm not evil because it's a great program. But what if someone just goes after me and says Rex is crazy, whatever, and a bunch of guys with guns and badges show up at my house to get my guns?
Yeah, it's not just somebody's word. There has to be demonstrable things. There's a process in place. There's third-party judgment that occurs. So it's not just my word against your word. There's a lot more parameters that are written into the law with, before a judge, that hopefully we can still somewhat trust our judicial system to make that call, and a repeal process in place for that person to be able to get their guns back. But in that meantime, you have that kind of pause on making sure that the danger is past, or the person has gotten the mental help that they need, whatever it takes. So there's a process, and it's not just me calling you out and saying that you need your guns taken away.
So that's education. The right doesn't know that. They're like all worried.
Yeah.
But before the show, I mentioned one of my concerns was if someone goes on a 72-hour hold, why doesn't that information get pushed up across the registry? Because as I know it, to be told right now, and maybe when you guys can bring some clarity, but I don't think it's the case. Let's say this person goes on a 72-hour hold. Most 72-hour holds, the person is released, goes out after it just goes and shoots up the mall or whatever. Like, how come this person? And you mentioned the HIPAA, like
this is Health Privacy Act. So, because when that happens, it's usually in an emergency room. And most people with mental health disorders are not violent. The majority of people with mental health disorders are not violent. So the fact that that person is on a 72-hour hold and may or may not need further evaluation or further treatment through a mental health process is truly private information to their health care. And that needs to remain private. That, to me, that is under the 14th Amendment. Like, we can't, if in fact they have been determined further down the road by a psychiatrist or a mental health professional that they are of danger, that we do have laws in place, and we strengthened those even last year to make sure that our net was, the holes in the net, we're kind of closing them up to be able to catch more of those individuals.
However, if we're really trying to curb, gun violence, and a lot of it deals with mental health, this person goes to the ER, okay? And most of the time at the ER, they're busy, they're understaffed, we still have COVID issues going on. That person is at a risk, that's why they're there. Why can't that information, HIPAA or not, be sent up? Because it takes a long time, especially with the backlog in Colorado, to get that person seen. And like if someone's been flagged, like the red flag law, there's this pattern they've developed because they've been in the system this long. But if we're really trying to curb gun violence, isn't that one of the things that should be looked at? Because I'm on the Marshall Fire Recovery Group. We have 27 new patients request mental health treatment a week. And we're out of money already. We don't have the clinicians and time, and we're running out. And that's just that one little piece. So by the time someone goes to a 72-hour hold, and maybe they get some treatment months down the road,
and
that needs to be addressed.
Here's where I would rewind that discussion. It's a great discussion to have, but I would rewind back to our discussion about transforming public safety. How do we look at society's safety, and how do we get to those people before they end up in the emergency room on a 72-hour hold? The resources aren't there, the pathways aren't there. How do we help people in a compassionate way get what they need way before they end up in the emergency room?
Universal background checks and sufficient waiting periods would catch that individual, and you wouldn't have to violate their HIPAA rights.
Right. However, if I was to go and buy a gun, I wouldn't mind waiting a month. Okay? I may change my mind. I may not want to spend $1,000 on a whatever.
Then we better secure our borders, because there's guns that go underneath with all the drugs as well.
Yeah.
And we just gave 227,000 assault weapons to a known terrorist organization. One more reason why the crazy right don't want to give up their AR-15s.
And those terrorists are now screaming for help because of the earthquake. Screaming for help. Anyway, moving on. This is something that no one in the United Kingdom especially would understand. Why do we need a Vote Without Fear Act?
That came about over the last few years with the divisiveness and the extreme rhetoric that we're hearing from the left and the right about voter fraud and voter intimidation and the ability for secure, safe, transparent election systems, and people being able to show up in a public place. Luckily in Colorado, very few people actually vote in person. We have an incredible mail-in ballot system. But when showing up to a public place of voting, just like we have the electioneering law, where you're not allowed to be right there at a polling facility, yelling for your candidate with signs. The fact that someone might be walking in with a firearm, concealed or not, added fear in some neighborhoods, in some pockets of voting folks in our state. And it rose to a level enough that putting that in place, saying this is kind of a safe zone or a gun-free zone, because voting is such a pillar of our democracy, that to make sure that people will not feel intimidation in being able to show up to vote. So I could certainly discuss this, in a way that, I question, like, do we really need that? Was that a feel-good piece of legislation? Maybe. Maybe it was, because I see our system as being one where that really isn't the majority of people that show up to vote in person, and certainly not a large percentage of people that show up fearful. That's what that was all about.
Okay, and let's close on this. But there's also another act going through which no one outside of this country would understand, Protecting the Kids Act.
That's at the federal level.
Right.
That's what that's what the House passed.
Yeah.
And went to the Senate at the federal level. The Senate may have renamed it.
The Senate actually culled it way down to almost only 3 major measures, and made it more palatable, passable in the U.S. Senate. And that's really one of the things I think we really need to take into consideration is what can we pass through the House and the Senate. And the Senate just sent it back to the House, to get approval, because the Senate changes significantly enough, the House has to reapprove it.
Has to reapprove it.
Right.
So I don't know if it's called that anymore.
And so 18 to 21, is going to be more significant background checks, which I think is a good thing, because there's a plethora of firearms around our society. That's just the reality we live in right now. And we don't see a significant legislation moving forward to address the issue of those firearms being available. And so we need to protect our schools. So I was really encouraged to see that bipartisan progress being made in the Senate. And another place where bipartisan progress is made that's not brought up very often is in Florida, where they passed the 21 and up purchase age, they after the Parkland school shooting. And Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High has metal detectors. They have significant security measures in place, and so does the whole entire New York City school system.
So
We're going to have to draw a close to part one, because unfortunately Karen has to leave us because she has to shoot off to a very important meeting. Karen, do you have any final words?
Well, I am just really proud of what Colorado has done. We're kind of middle of the road, maybe the top third of states that have taken measures to address gun violence. And again, it's about saving one life at a time or 10 at a time. And that's important that we have done that. And so I'm very proud and was happy to support many of these measures at the state level. The duty to report your lost and stolen firearm, the safe storage, the boyfriend loophole we closed here in Colorado. Many of the things that they're talking about at the federal level, we've already done.
Right.
As a state, I know a lot of that federal money is going to be going out to states to encourage states to do these things. Well, I want our state to get some of those funds anyway, even though we've already done this, because there's more that we can do and should do and continue these discussions around gun safety.
Karen, I want to thank you so much for coming into the studio this morning to record part one of the show with us. It's a shame you have to leave us because we've got so much more to talk about. But
thanks, Nigel.
Once again, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you back at the table sometime in the near future. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into part one of the Gun Violence Show, and we're going to get into some of the real nitty-gritty of what goes on in this country. Watch part two. Thank you very much. Goodbye for now.